Welcome back to Shop Talk for Season 5. I'm Brandi.
And this is James, and we talk about all things related to mental health and cross-cultural workers.
So glad you're here. Hey guys, welcome to Shop Talk. We're happy today to have Keith Webb with us. Second time guest. So you're in our second time guest club. You
Hey,
get a free
thanks.
t-shirt or something like that. All right, let me introduce Keith to you guys. Keith is the president of Creative Results Management, a coach training organization for Christian leaders. He designed the coach model and is the author of the best-selling book, The Coach Model for Christian Leaders. For 20 years, Keith lived and ministered in Japan, Indonesia, and Singapore. Keith teaches practical skills for cross-cultural workers, and his latest course is Money Matters, and it's about how to build financial sustainability. So we're going to talk to Keith about that some today, how cross-cultural workers can invest in their own financial sustainability, and how that's a good thing. It's not I don't know, a bad or I guess air quotes worldly thing to think about your own financial sustainability as cross-cultural workers. So anyway, thanks Keith for being here.
Thank you for
Um,
having me on.
Yay. James will get your t-shirt in the mail for our second time
That's
guest.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I will say
So,
your last time on, I know it's just a little bit of a sound bite, but you talked specifically about how important it is for leaders to have time dedicated to their leadership role. And I have used that so much in the last
Hmm.
2.5, 3 years when I'm especially working with leaders who are a little bit overworked and trying to do whatever it was that they were doing before they fell into leadership and be like, hey, you've got to focus more. And I'd say even our Scentwell team is really adopting that as kind of leadership principle, being like whoever's in the lead role is really making that their primary thing. So love what you brought to our podcast last time. Looking forward to this time.
Good to hear it was useful.
Yeah.
well, tell us a little bit about your Money Matters course and just how you got started with this and what your course entails.
Sure. So for people who know me for the last 15 or 20 years now, I've been doing coaching training and started off in Indonesia as a missionary, doing that and learning to coach and then coaching people and then training people. And we're training mostly cross-cultural workers and we were doing all that. And then it grew bigger than a ministry arm of that organization. And so it went off on its own. But when I think back to those, a lot of years of training people on coaching skills, and part of that training is we practice coaching on whatever topic they want to talk about. And I can't tell you how many times money comes up, money management and all this. And it comes up particularly as people get into their late 50s and 60s and suddenly realize that they should have done something about it 20 years ago and they haven't. And now they're scrambling and hoping a 15-minute coaching practice is going to solve everything. And it doesn't, of
Wait,
course.
does it? Okay.
No,
Okay.
yeah, well, sorry to break the news. Yeah. It takes at least a 30-minute coaching
Yeah.
conversation.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, yeah. But we lived in Asia 20 years. We raised support for our full, in other words, our whole income that we were receiving was through support for almost 30 years. And so that's the basis for what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about my more current thing where we've turned the coaching into an organization and I make a salary from that and that type of thing. I'm talking about when we were support raising like this. And we did 3 countries. And one of the things, so I saw so many different things back then and also over the years since then that just tell me one of the big issues is financial management. It is support raising too, but more about what you do with the money once you get it that makes a difference. And it makes a difference quite negatively to people. For
Mhm.
example, we lived in Indonesia. The second country we lived in was Indonesia. That was an inexpensive country. So our money went a long way. The US dollars we raised went a long way there. And so what people did was they would let their support drop to that amount of money. But what happens when their kids now are school age and they need to have them go to a private school, which is more international standard cost, like 10 grand a kid or 15 grand a kid a year? What do they, where now they don't have the money, or they want to move like we did. We wanted to move for ministry purposes to Singapore, one of the more expensive countries in the world.
That's a shift.
Yeah, it is a shift, and most people could not make that shift because they had let their support dropped. Well, we actually ramped up our support in Indonesia during those years. And then so we could make ministry decisions without money being the biggest factor. And that's my whole vision for the course is it's what I call financial sustainability. How do we help people have financial sustainability, which means the ability to live comfortably and have enough reserves to cover unexpected expenses and future needs without borrowing money while giving most of their time and attention to ministry. It means not making ministry calling decisions based on money. That's what I'm after. And I think if we could get everybody living out their calling without money be stopping them, and I'm not saying pie in the sky, I'm talking reasonable here. But if we could do that, I think we'd see a lot different ministry things happening.
That's
I
so
had a
interesting.
supporter message me this past year and just said, yeah, I really hope that us partnering with you gives you the ability to spend more time doing what you're supposed to be doing than trying to figure out how to get it done.
Exactly.
And I'm like, wow, that guy gets it.
Yeah.
Where do you see people or cross-cultural workers struggle with this? We talked about it a little bit before, and you had said like some really fantastic ideas about where you see that happening. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you about that.
So half your audience, maybe maybe more than half, has already discounted the whole idea. They're like, "Oh, that's not us," because and it's all these limiting beliefs people hold and beliefs they hold about money. And there's a lot of mindset beliefs. Cross-cultural workers shouldn't have any more than exactly what it takes to not starve. There shouldn't be any luxury. They should have less than their poorest donor has. That to be a cross-cultural worker means to be financial struggle. To live by faith means I have no savings or I have no preparation because I'm going to pray and God will take care. You've got all these different things. And then people grow up with sets of beliefs about money too. My family was not a wealthy family at all. And so when I was a kid, I had no allowance. If I wanted any money to buy anything, I had to earn it somehow. So, I did the paper route and I collected cans and newspaper to recycle them because they'd pay you a little bit for it back then, these sorts of things. And so there's so many mindsets that get in the way of people even taking a look at this topic that it's a non-starter for most people. And that's the biggest mistake is just assuming that what you think about money and ministry is true. And there's a little saying, we use this in coaching, don't believe everything you think.
Yeah.
I like that.
That's where anxiety
Right?
comes from.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't make that one up, but I love that one.
Yeah.
Don't believe everything you think. And so that's really the biggest mistake is just believing what you think about money.
Well, I mean, there's a reason that it's an issue, right? It's the number one thing that couples fight about,
Yeah.
followed by, in-laws and sex. So it's like right up there with things that cause tension in families and relationships and organizations and teams. I don't think I saw conversations around money and finances modeled well. And
Hmm.
I mean, kind of like you're talking about, there just wasn't a lot. So it was always stressful. And I think in my 15 years on the field, it's almost always been a source of stress 90% of the time, whether or not we go eat out or whether or not we have
Yes.
a drink with our meal or not. I mean, just this level of stuff all of the time. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of people are also in that place where
We're there
there
with
is
you.
there is no emergency budget. It's is if
Yes.
Right.
something happens, we just got to go hit the supporters up and say help and hope something happens. And there is a beauty in that faith component, but I think it's actually can be connected to a really poor theology.
Yeah. And that is the thing, James, is you've got so the thing about money is, like you said, it's one of the, did you say it was the number one?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, so it's the number one thing couples fight about in that, and it also is, I think, one of the most untalked about things. Nobody can talk about money, and now we're not talking about money, raising money for the ministry. You talk about that. I'm talking about your own personal
Yeah.
finances. You can never talk about it. You can't share what you save. You can't share what's in your bank account. You can't share any of that. And because of that, and because of that kind of taboo that's out there about talking about your own personal finances, because of that, we miss out on all the tacit knowledge learning of how to manage those things. And we just assume it's like when someone gets married, it's like, what? I gotta have a class on being married. We're in love. We should just be able to, be in love and be happy. And it's like, no, it actually takes work. But, people don't want to do that either, right? And
Mhm.
Yeah.
so, this is a big thing. It's not talked about. And then in ministry circles, even more so, it's a taboo thing. And so the reason I talk about money is I want mission workers to experience freedom in living out God's calling. And it requires financial sustainability. Everybody's trying to change the whole world without any money. And money is actually helpful for yeah, for doing things and getting things done out there. And so it does not have to be your enemy. I have made money my friend and my servant. It doesn't
Mm.
control me. I make it work for me and serve me in my ministry. So, for example, when the time came after 5 years in Indonesia, Lori and I were able to move to Singapore. That was expensive, and it was a definite lifestyle change. But we lived there, or we moved over there, did what we were called to do there, and stayed for 5 years. But it was because we were already looking at the money prior to needing it.
And I think if we can eliminate some of the lies that we've told ourselves or some of the things that we think about money, how releasing and how freeing that would be for cross-cultural workers. Because I think there's so much, guilt surrounding like James said, what we spend our money on, what we don't spend our money on, or if we're trying to live at, less than our lowest paid support or whatever like that.
Yeah.
There's on top of living cross culturally and the stress that that brings, the additional stress of the finances on top of that is just a lot. So I think if we can learn about being free with that, free of our understanding, that would just help so much.
Yeah, it is. And so you were asking about what are one of the common mistakes is trimming your fundraising budget to only meet and just barely meet your current living expenses. Because although you may not feel like you're making bank right now, you're making money now, the money you're making now is both for now and the near future and far future. So you can't count on there's a cognitive bias, uh,
Mhm.
and I can't remember. I think it's called a Peterson bias or something like that. I can't remember what it was. It's a planning bias, and the planning bias says that everyone. If I say, "Do you have money for that? Do you have time for that right now?" Oh no, I'm too busy. I don't have enough money. But if we say, how about in a year? Would you do that or buy that in a year? Oh yeah, I'll have you, and we project we'll have more time, more money in the future, but when the future arrives, we don't. And so it's this idea of, oh, when the kids do need to go to school, or when they are going to go off to college, or when we are going to go to wherever, then we'll have more money by then. But you don't. Because basically, whatever you're doing right now is what you're going to do a year from now, 3 years from now. It does not shift dramatically. You just think it's gonna. So that's one of the mistakes that people make. Another big mistake that people make in their finances and their personal finances. James mentioned it earlier, and that is to not prepare for the unexpected. So there was a study there's been a lot of studies of Americans, and they asked, could you pay $1,000 unexpected expense without without turning to a credit card or loan, right? And by credit card, I think it means put it on there, but you don't have the money actually to pay it off,
Yeah.
right? You're not just letting it float for five
Mhm.
weeks and then automatically pay. You don't have the thousand.
Yeah.
55% of Americans, 55% cannot pay $1,000 without incurring debt. 55%.
That's crazy.
It is crazy because unexpected expenses are so common, we should consider them expected expenses. It's things like a medical bill, it's things like a car repair, it's things like a trip back home because of whatever. If you're a little bit older and you got kids in college, there's something that happens with that kid and you got to suddenly go back. for it, or the your or a parent, or something like you got these unexpected expenses. And the thing is they did a study of how much they did another study. There's lots of studies on all these finances, so I love it because I'm a researcher type person. And so it was like, okay, they said, how many of you had an unexpected expense last year, and then did you have the money to cover it? And then the other question that some of them asked is, how much was that unexpected expense? And the average unexpected expense the previous year was 2,500. It wasn't
Hmm.
1,000. So 55% of Americans don't have $1,000 that they could pay an unexpected expense. And the actual average unexpected expense was 2,500, not 1,000. This is where debt comes from. This is where panicking comes from. This is where stress comes from. Imagine instead you did something different. Imagine you had a $3,000 unexpected expense, I call emergency fund, a $3,000 emergency fund that you had built over time, and it's sitting there. That $3,000 is just sitting there. You're not living off of it. You're living off of another fund, your other money. You're living off that. And then you get $1,000 emergency expense. Bummer, but you just pull it out of the three.
It's
You
there.
did it without fighting. You did it without stress. You did it without, there's already enough stress for whatever the emergency is
Right.
that spent it, right? And so, but you're not adding to it. And then you spend that and you go, oh my gosh, it kills me to spend this $1,000 on this thing. And then you start putting it back in to build it back up to three, right? That's like being prepared. It's like faith in advance. I have the faith that says, God, it's not the faith, or it's not faith. Oh, if I have that $1,000 expense, God's going to miraculously have it come from somewhere. That's one sort of faith. The other sort of faith is, oh, God's going to miraculously give me $100 a month to build up to $3,000 in my emergency fund so that when I have $1,000 thing, I'm not testing him like, like some of the biblical characters testing God.
Yeah, we're not ruling out faith by doing planning, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's the part where people can kind of get a little hung up on it is that it feels, I think, sometimes unsavory to be doing some of this planning, or there just isn't margin for it. I think we talk about people living beyond their means in terms of energy and capacity. It's often the same is true for finances as well.
Mm.
We switched locations from North Africa to here, which was a big jump in expenses, and our budget didn't increase.
Okay.
So we lived for years, basically overspending and hoping for one-time gifts and trying to like it's super stressful. And it was because organizationally we had to jump through so many hoops to get a new budget and to get a budget that was actually what it was supposed to be. And yet I still got invited like a couple weeks ago to apply for food stamps. So it's we're
Wow.
still don't have it all nailed out yet, but it's the even the organizations sometimes don't build that in. And I think those of us who have been around a lot of organizations can probably name some of the more common offenders on this, but they just I think people struggle so much to advocate for themselves, either within their organization or their supporters, to say this is actually what it costs to live, and we're
Yes.
we're actually constrained. So our organization tells us what our budget is, and we can only raise up to 10% of that and get it. Everything else goes to a reserve account we don't have access to. So we're they're limiting us to meet with the standards, and that's just sometimes challenging. Whereas some organizations it's wide open, and others give people budgets that are not sustainable.
And I think it's something I wish that people would realize is that if you do live in a financially stable situation, you're able to do that. You're much more viable long term as a cross-cultural worker
Yes.
because you're not living with that constant stress over you.
Yeah.
And Keith, you mentioned what 55% of Americans don't have, $1,000 to cover like an emergency expense. And I
Yes.
wonder if I'm assuming that would be more for cross-cultural workers, like that the percentage would be higher.
So I have not seen statistics saying how much debt cross-cultural workers have.
Hmm.
I don't know. I've not been doing this matters long enough to have a sense of it. They seem to cross-cultural workers seem to, if they're new, they seem to come into it with some school debt sometimes, that type of thing, or they've done another degree or something and had that kind of debt. But others, but it is a thing. So debt is a huge thing in there, and so I don't know if I have the number, but I'm remembering it to be about every man, woman, and child in the United States. The average consumer debt means not house mortgage, but
Right.
consumer debt was more than $6,000
No way.
on, and that's consumer debt means credit card, that type of thing.
Mm,
Not car either. Yeah. The average car loan out there is more than $500 a month.
Really?
mm,
Yeah. It's and yeah. So and that's not even a new car. So used car is a little bit less. I think it's 400 a month like this.
wow.
And so so I think this is another mistake that cross-cultural workers make, and we'll talk about somebody else for a second so they feel better. But the and that is we think that all of our donors who got the nice car and the nice house and all this, we think they're all financially set, and it's just us. It's not. It's all a mirage. All you got to do is go listen to Dave Ramsey a little bit, and you'll hear all the stories of, how people look so good on the outside, but it's not. It's all debt in there. And I remember when I was in Indonesia, Lori and I didn't have much. We didn't have much put away at all for retirement, so there's nothing in that. And then we didn't have anything in what I call a medium term fund. And that medium term fund it's a fund where you're investing, you're doing an actual investment so you can maybe get a good 10% a year off of it, return on it. And but you're going to spend it in 5 to 10 years. So it's for things like a car, it's things like a move, maybe. It's things like a relocation back home or something like that, where you're gonna have a certain amount that's going to be support account money that will pay for things, but then you got your own. Or it's for a kid. I remember our kids are getting older. It's like we're gonna have to get them a car. I mean, I want my car, so we
Yeah.
need to get them a car, and that's going to cost. And cars are not a $3,000 thing. When you're putting your 16-year-old daughter in it, you're not giving her the $3,000 car. My son, okay, but not Jessica. Jessica, she needs it's an $8,000 car, I need something that's going to make sure it runs. Ben can call me, but Jessica, no. And so, you got those kinds of things. And so it's
Right,
medium,
right. Or
it's this
perhaps,
medium. Yeah,
I'm sorry,
exactly.
perhaps just I'm thinking of an example maybe someone could relate to. Your son with their $2,000 car across the country might have to get it towed. I just examples, I've heard
Recent
of.
example.
But yes.
Yeah. So, so the thing is you need medium term fund. We didn't have any of that, and so I was feeling like I was like behind, quote unquote,
Mhm.
behind, because I'm seeing my friends, my peers. I was late 30s then, and so I was seeing my friends. They were already on their second house, so they already did the starter house and sold it, and
Yeah.
now they're on the second house and maybe even remodeling it, right? And I'm just like, oh, we're so far behind. We're from Seattle area, Redmond, where Microsoft campus is here and everything's doubling all the housing prices. We're never going to be able to afford a house. What is this, God? You said if somebody gives up, you'll pay 30, 60, 100 times more, this type of thing. Where's my 100 times? All I'm doing, a lot of whining, right? And my friend comes over and I'm talking to him about finances, and he was a executive. So the thing I find is business executives are happy to talk about money. Missionaries aren't, but business executives will share numbers. And so he says, "Well, tell me what you got." And I tell him what we have, and then he's like, "Yeah, okay." Like I could see he's not impressed. I don't know what we had, like 30,000 in retirement or something. And maybe I don't know what we had in other kinds of savings, but it wasn't a lot. But then it slipped out that I didn't have any debt, which I didn't think it was a big deal, but we had no debt. And he goes, wait a minute, you don't have any debt? He goes, that's huge. That puts you already in the top 20 of everybody I know. But I said, but we don't have any assets. He goes, the house that I'm living in, I knew the house he was living in, the house that I'm living in, we owe more on that house now, 10 years later, than we did when we got it
Yeah.
because they had borrowed against it for vacation, education, car, emergency thing, or that, like this. And it wasn't that he was financially irresponsible. It was just, this is the reality. So I think he's got all this equity that he's built, but they've actually spent it. And this is so common.
That's your
And so
mirage.
So it is a mirage. And so this is part of the thing of having that conversation made me feel confident. It's like I may not have a lot on the plus side, but I don't have anything on the minus side. And because I didn't have anything on the minus side, any little bit I did get, I could put in,
Mm,
even a few $100 wasn't going to pay off debt costing me. Instead, I could put it forward to the plus, and then that started making a return. And that was a huge lesson for me. And I started seeing everybody different. I stopped seeing myself as so completely different than all my donors and my friends back home. And I started seeing myself as, it's not that I'm comparing to catch up, but we all compare, right? And so I want to learn from compare, that's what I mean, and so and all of a sudden I started realizing that. And so that was a huge turning point for us.
yeah, that's massive. And I think a lot of people in cross-culture work won't have a lot of debt because either their organization has set that as a limiting factor on their acceptance, or due to the transition, if they did have a house, they might have sold it. You might have some student debt, but that's, I think, a lot more manageable and usually a lower percentage than other things. So I think that makes a ton of sense. I think a lot of cross-cultural workers would be in a similar place of very low or limited debt, or they probably wouldn't have gotten accepted into their organization.
Yeah, maybe not, but even a low level of debt. So here's the thing. If you so there's a financial concept called the Matthew effect, and it's out of the book of Matthew. And so we're Christian cross-cultural workers, we should pay attention to this one. But it's at the end of the parable of the talents. Do you remember how
Mhm.
shocking that is? The person who has 10 bags of gold earns 10 more. The one who has five earns five more. And then the one who gave one buried it in the ground. And the master rebukes him and says, you knew I was hard nosed on this, and yet you didn't even put it on account somewhere so I could at least make interest. Give that bag of gold to the one who has 10 and throw this guy out of here. And the people are like, what? But the guy with 10 already has 10. And he goes, and then it says, whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And that's a really hard passage for us. It's like, what? Is Jesus advocating that, or is he saying that's the way it is and it should change? Because we've got all this equality and thing, and certainly we don't want people to have this continued gap between rich and poor. Here's the thing, though. I think when Jesus talks a lot about money, and he just talks about it as it is, not how he wants it to be necessarily. He talks about the way dynamics work. And here's the thing, with this Matthew effect, economists have pointed to a dynamic where those with resources gain not only more resources, but they gain them at an increasingly faster rate. The reason is because when you have, let's say you have $100, if you take $100 and you've invested it, you're making 10%. 1 year later, you're going to have $110. The next year, if you put another $100 in, you're now starting the year at, let's say it's just compounding annually. You now have $200 that you put in, 100 the first year, 100 the second year, and the $10 interest. Well, so now your interest, if you make 10% on that, now you have $21 more. So at the beginning of the third year, you're going to put in another $100. Now you have $300 and $21. At the end of the year, you're now going to have $32 more interest to go on top of the $21. So now, after just 3 years, 3 full years, you've put in $300, but you now have $52 interest
Mhm.
return. That's what it means. And then now just add zeros to that. It's not $100, it's $1,000, or it's $10,000, or it's $100,000. So you had $10,000, and then it becomes 20 and then 30, but then the interest is, so now you have $35,200. It's like, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah, yeah,
5,000 for doing nothing? Yeah.
yeah.
And so this is the Matthew effect. But the sad part is the opposite works the same way. If you're paying interest, and paying debt, you cannot get ahead because you're using the money you have to pay off the debt and the interest. And if you don't pay it all off quick, that interest also exponentially grows, just like the positive return grows. It's doing the negative like this. But it's worse than that because you're not putting anything into the positive return investment because you're paying off the, so you just go negative and you don't go up with the positive. And
Mm.
so if you can get out from under debt, as soon as you can get out from under debt, and James, my sense is that a lot of cross-cultural workers, debt is not their biggest thing,
Mm,
but you have to do, it's one is don't be paying interest and paying off debt because now you've spent it,
right.
but also be investing. And if you can invest a bit, then it starts working for you. And that's what the parable of the talents is all about. And Jesus did use the parable of the talents. He said, use money to make more money. It's a growth process. And he was using that as a spiritual illustration of this is how the kingdom of God works. If you invest your talents, your life, in spiritual things, you'll get a spiritual return just like money does. You see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not one against the other.
Yeah, I think that was one of Ellie's biggest takeaways from your course. So, Keith invited me to his course, but I'm a little maxed with my academic studies right now. So I had Ellie do it. And that was one of her big ways is like, she just keeps asking, how do we make our money work for us?
Yeah.
Like, and I think another big takeaway was this medium term savings, which was not something I'd ever heard of before.
Yeah. Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I think we're just thinking strategically about how to do that. We were for a year and a half ago totally debt free, which was great, and then I went back to school, so we're going to be refiguring what that looks like. But I think we're just really being intentional. One of our takeaways from your course was, we wrote out our whole budget. The nice thing is we buy everything with a credit card and pay it off each month because we like
Yeah.
the points. But the credit card automatically categorizes everything for us.
Okay.
So in, less than 5 minutes, I have 3 months of our budget that I can categorize, itemize, know exactly how much we're spending, where we're spending it. It happened like that on Excel. I add in like our rent and stuff that we don't pay with a credit card, and we had our whole budget and what we're doing, and you gave some really great percentages just to think about like what are your living costs and what percentage. I think it's 50% trying to stay below 50%, which we are. We didn't know it, but it's great to know that we are. So some of that stuff is just really, really practical and saying, okay, we now know where we're at. Because I think a lot of times you just don't know where you're at,
Mm-hmm.
which now enables us to be like really strategic about how we're going to spend and to save.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's great. Any shockers in there that you don't have to give us all the details, but
Yeah, give us the details though. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, no, I think I was nervous about talking about it. I mean, I had Ellie do the course
Okay.
because I thought it would
Yeah.
I do all the finances. So I think there was a little bit of a potential fear of shame. Like, am I totally, have I been messing
Mhm.
up? And now she's found out
Yeah.
and we've got to like navigate that as a couple. It just wasn't that way, which was great. I
Well,
think,
hang on a second.
oh yeah,
So with that one, so in the course, I'll
yeah,
say if you're married, because the course it's they're lessons, and
yes,
each lesson is like a page, and there's a video of me introducing it for 1 to 3 minutes, like that, and then you read over the page, and it's easy to digest. It's very I don't use, well, I do use some financial language because we need to learn some of that language. But if I'm using any kind of jargon or any kind of term, I define it, right?
mm,
And in fact, that's what the lesson's about a lot of times. Like, what does compounding growth mean? Right? Compounding is that interest, getting interest on the interest, and then that gets interest on the, like this type of thing. And so one of the things I say is, if you're married, talk with your spouse about this. And then I put in brackets, your goal here is not to convince them your way of spending is right. It's to understand each other.
yeah,
I don't like
amen.
that.
Not to convince them, because that's the funny thing is that everybody thinks the way they spend money is reasonable. is reasonable and logical and thought out. But the way that that person spent the money, oh, that's an extravagant. Shouldn't do it, right? And this happens in with couples too. So I'm glad
I
you guys were able to have a
yeah,
good
yeah.
conversation about that.
Well, I'm the spender, so it was easier, I think, for the non-spender to be taking the course.
Well, so that can be the thing is in most couples, there's also I
Yes.
mean, everybody spends, that is true, and but we spend differently, and some spend more than the other, and some spends more than the other, and it's discretionary, right?
Right.
And so then what you can easily get is you get judgment by the non-spender, and like that. But we all spend for psychological reasons. It's not, it's more psychological than anything, the spending. And so
Yes.
when we start looking into that, and if we can get into a judgment-free zone and talk about it, it can be helpful. I mean, I'll share one of mine. So I will go to the grocery store and I will see that the jam, the
Hey,
raspberry
you
jam
shared
I
this one.
want, yeah, is $1.50 off. So, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna save $1.50 here, because I'm thrifty. And so then I buy that jam. I don't want that jam. I want Smucker's, but that's not the one on sale. This, Kroger is on sale, so I buy that one, even
Yeah.
though it's not as good. So then I go home though, but Apple announced the brand new second generation AirPod Pros, 250 bucks. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I need those AirPod Pros. So then I think I'm gonna get those AirPod Pros because my daughter Jessica told me she needs some of these earbuds. So I can send her my old ones and she can use those and I'll use the AirPod Pros. So in summary, I'm thrifty because I saved $150 on jam, and I am generous because I gave my perfectly good AirPod Pro Generation 1s to Jessica. I am so generous. And then I just leave off the part that I blew $250 on second generation AirPod Pros when my AirPod Generation 1s were perfect. Right? This is the illogicalness of our spending in how we'll do it.
Crazy
Yeah.
justification for a dopamine hit.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. But we feel justified. And
Right.
so it's not until we take a look at and the reason why your spouse, the other spouse can't bring that up to you is because you'll point, in my case, I'll point to hers and
Right.
she's got, her illogical thing, that's whatever. And then it becomes, tit for tat that she's
Yeah.
oh, but yours was 250, mine was only 100 and a quarter.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, all right. And then I
Yeah.
then I think of one more that she's got that she's, this is where it's a no-win thing. And that's just why couples fight about money.
Right.
And so what I'm after with couples is I'm after people to have couples to have conversations, or singles too, to have conversations about how you spend, to reflect on it
Mhm.
and then make a decision. And I can afford an AirPod Pro Generation 2. So it's okay to do that. And it's okay to have a splurge here and there. It's if it's getting out of control because you're overspending, you're not saving, you're not investing, you're not doing those things, then you need to have a different sort of conversation. But this is it. And if you don't know what you're spending, if you're not aware of it, it's very difficult to catch those things.
Mm,
Keith, before we started recording, you mentioned that you would really like for people, say, around James's age demographic, to
40.
sort of invest more in your course and be interested more in like financial planning. Whereas people my age, we're just gone. So like, good luck to you guys. But what would you say to younger cross-cultural workers to kind of explain the significance of this to them? Because we were talking about how younger people don't really think this is that important. Retirement's so far away. I'm healthy. We're not going to have any medical emergencies. Yeah, and things like that.
It's hard because so I'm thinking back to me in my late 30s. So my ideal, although everyone can benefit from this course, my ideal age, because you can do so much with it, you can do like 5 times more with it if is plus or minus 40 years old. So all the way down to their mid 20s, but I don't even expect those people to be paying attention. but by 35, you better be paying attention. By 45, in that 10 year, you gotta start paying attention in here. And the thing is you can make so much progress with so little. And I see the sad stories are I see people who are serving God, they're taking a long-term invest my life in spiritual things approach. They're using so much personal discipline to do their thing, but they're actually living for the moment when it comes to their finances because they're so paycheck to paycheck, nothing saved up, nothing there. And then when they end up leaving the field for whatever reason, whether that's after 5 years or 20 years, they got nothing. And it's really hard. It's really hard. And they're not ready, or their kids already have lived a life of sacrifice for their parents' choices of being in the mission field. I know there's plenty of payoffs, and my kids see them now too. They didn't always,
No.
but they see them, they're seeing them now. But kids experience a lot of sacrifice. And then have even, more struggle because we haven't made any arrangements for finances. Mom and dad can never visit them during the, school year or, I mean, I'm just talking about this kind of stuff. And I think it's just sad when you get that. We're out there where they could have started doing a few things, and this is what we'll show in the course. Really easy baby steps. We'll show them how to do it, how to start making progress. And the progress adds up. I've been experimenting with my two kids. My kids are now
Mm.
28 and 26. And so when they graduated from college and got their first jobs, I started basically that's where Money Matters started, was me systematically trying to sit down with them and talk to them when they would ask me, "Hey, how much should I put towards retirement?" And so giving them percentages and talking about emergency funds and then adding it all up, and they would go, "What? I don't have that much money. It only leaves me this." It's gonna be, and then facing the reality of what tax, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I've been experimenting, and I'm telling you, nothing motivates like success. When you've got some money and you put it away and you start looking at that account, and all of a sudden you realize that you've saved up to 10,000 and you scrimped and saved, but that's what you put in there. But it's now worth 10,800. And it's like, I didn't do that 800. That's free money. And then a couple years later, you've now got 15,000 that you've put in there, but it's worth 18. Oh boy. All of a sudden it's very motivating. And the thing is everybody can make progress with this if they start doing some basic things, because getting a return on investment requires putting some money in. You have to put some money in, but then the return you get, and I'll give well, I'll say it right here. S&P 500 index fund. That's it. S&P 500 index fund. Easy peasy thing to invest in through any brokerage company. And it's earned on average over the last 10 years, 9.75% annually. And two of those years were negative by 22%, and another year was, I think, 18%. But over the 10-year, the average is almost 10% return on that. And so if people can get going with that and just do anything in that, they'll start making progress and quit paying interest, because interest is not 10%. Interest tends to be higher than that, much higher. As James, as you said, school
Mm.
loans are less, but any kind of consumer debt interest is more like 16 to, it can be 35% on a credit card.
Wow, this has been great. How can people find your resources, get involved, sign up for the course? What's that look like?
So can we put it in the show notes?
Oh yeah, of course.
I think that's the easiest thing in there, because I'm not sure how well it's searchable by Google yet. The course is called Money Matters for Mission Workers, and so we'll put the link in the show notes. There is a fee for it, and part of the reason for the fee is the same thing I'm telling you all, and that is sustainability, right? Is if this becomes, for example, for me, if this is just a volunteer thing for me, guess how long it runs? As long as I can continue to volunteer.
Right.
So what we've built in is we built I think it's $114 a year for this course. We do monthly 1 hour Zoom calls where we discuss and have a chance to discuss with each other, and you can ask me questions, and we'll discuss each of these different topics throughout the year. And we do that live, but the rest of it's self-study. So if you're not interested in budgeting, but you want to know about investing, you just do those lessons on investing. If you want to know, I've got a little thing in there about communicating to donors, and I have one teeny thing about support raising. That is a technique that a lot of people have used, works well for them. So you could jump to that. It's go where you like with it. It's not my first approach on all of these my financial sustainability things is not about limiting your spending and getting a budget. That's where everybody else seems to start. I don't. I start with why. If I don't know why I need to limit my spending, I'm not gonna. And
Right.
so I start with all the whys and give you some exciting things like James, you're talking about this midterm investment fund, where you're saving for midterm stuff. Yeah, I love that fund. That was my favorite fund of all the
Mm.
funds because it's not something I'm going to use when I'm 65, which was forever away when I was 40. Now I'm 61, so it's like, man, I'm so glad I did something about that
Yeah.
20 years ago. I'm so happy. But the interesting thing is the medium term fund, it's a fund that you can access. It still makes investment level returns like that 10%. But it's something you're going to use in maybe 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, like that, towards stuff that you really care about. Like, we're going to buy a house someday. Where's that deposit going to come from? Kids need to go to school. Where's that starter money going to come from? Or the ticket to go see them going to come from? This kind of thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, I love it, and I'm excited because what I see and my vision for this is no one's going to get rich off of doing my course. They're not going to get rich, and it certainly doesn't happen quick. But what we could do is, and what I've already seen in the people who've gone through it is lowered stress,
Hmm.
less fighting, which means more communication, more connectedness at home, and people getting a plan and starting to initiate that plan of good, reasonable financial strategies. And it's different for everybody. Some people start investing differently or start investing. Other people get out of debt. Other people, we had one person who did not start a different side job because of all the effort that they realized it was going to take, and
Mm.
instead did something else instead that we talked about. And so the point is that money is a multi-pronged thing. That's why I couldn't people. I mean, where this course came from is somebody said, I said, I want to talk about money for mission workers. And they said, oh, good, come and do an hour and a half thing for us. And I'm like, what? How
Mm.
do you do that? And I started writing out the different things.
Mm.
And that's how I came up with these 27 lessons on different financial things because each of these things are just one different little prong. And it's not that you have to know and master all 27 things, but to be reasonably financially sustainable, it's not just one or two things you have to do. There's a number of different things that you need to plug some leaks and start doing some new behaviors.
Mm.
It's both of these things.
Right.
And so I found people really made good progress, and I'm glad to hear your experience with it, James.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're working on our plan, trying to be specific. But I think the biggest thing is it's just really helped us find a comfortable place to talk about it, which we haven't really done previously. So found it super helpful, highly encourage people to look into it, to use it. I think for those of us, especially in the counseling and member care field, we know so many people who have really struggled in the transition back to the home country context that happens for 98% of all cross-cultural workers at some point. And I think beginning to think now for that is just wise. Like we're not trying to prevent attrition, which is something we can't do and is almost a guaranteed to happen at some point as God calls people back into their home context to care for parents, to help raise their kids, to retire. And I know just so many people who have come up towards that retirement age and just can't. There's just not enough there to live off of. And that's just a really, really hard and stressful place to be. And we would love to encourage people to do things now to plan for that. So look up Keith Webb. We'll have all the information on the show notes. Keith, always great to have you back.
Thank you
Thanks,
for
Keith.
having me on here.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good. Good to
All
be
right.
with you.
See you next time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Keith. I started it clicked to me when I first contacted you on Facebook. I was like, "Hello, my name is Brandi Welchel, and I work with James Covey." Blah blah blah. And you're like, "I think I was on your podcast
I don't.
before."